So let's talk about what's actually happening in bulk fermentation. This is one of the more complex parts of the sourdough baking process. In bulk fermentation, there are basically three things happening. One is we're building the gluten structure. Two is we're rising the dough. And three, we're developing the flavor of the dough. So how does this work? There are three members of the team making all this happen. Number one, to build the gluten structure, that's your job as the baker. So as you stretch and fold the dough, stretching is building elasticity of the gluten, it's building the gluten structure, and then by folding the dough over, you're basically building a matrix or a grid of gluten. So that's called building the gluten structure. I like to envision that like this grid, this cooling rack. The second thing that's happening is the yeast is filling up the grid with carbon dioxide, and that is rising the dough. That's the job of the yeast. So the yeast basically eats sugar and starch, and it starts filling up each one of these cells that you've created in the grid of gluten in the matrix. The third thing that's happening is the lactic acid bacteria is also eating sugars and starches. That's working in the background, and it is developing the flavor of the dough. So let's talk about an example where all of these things go properly, and we'll use the tartine example as our baseline. So in the tartine recipe, as we've talked about, when you build the gluten structure, that's your job. You do 4 stretch and folds. So you complete the stretch and folds, you essentially build the grid. The second thing that happens is the lactic acid bacteria is working in the background, developing the flavor. And the third thing that's happening is the yeast is doing the heavy lifting during bulk fermentation. So the yeast is working at the perfect temperature. So you've created an environment between 78 and 82 degrees Fahrenheit. That's 25.5 to 27.8 degrees Celsius. So the yeast can do its job in that perfect warm environment, and it starts filling up the grid. It works through the 4-hour bulk fermentation period. That's the recommended time in the tartine recipe. And at the end of 4 hours exactly, the yeast fills up the last cell in the grid, and the dough has risen by exactly 30%. That is nirvana. That is the holy grail of bulk fermentation, is when all those elements work perfectly and it ends exactly on time. And this is an example of what nirvana looks like in this type of recipe where you're baking a basic country loaf. You see a very nice dome-shaped loaf, an even distribution of small, medium, and large size holes evenly distributed throughout the crumb. This is a sign of very good bulk fermentation. When any of those things go wrong, you have two outcomes. You have underproofing or overproofing. So essentially what happens with underproofing is the yeast can't finish its job for a variety of reasons. So underproofing is caused by three things. The first problem with underproofing is that you don't have sufficient gluten structure. So that's where you basically don't do your job building the grid. So if the recipe calls for 4 stretch and folds and you only do 2, you just don't build the grid sufficiently. So you've built one half the size. The yeast shows up ready to do its job. It starts filling up the grid, and it only gets to halfway up, and then it runs out of space to put the CO2, so the dough doesn't rise. So typically, with insufficient gluten structure, you will see a loaf like this. This is one of my early loaves. You'll tend to get a dense, flat loaf. The second reason, which is a little bit more common, that you will have underproofing is due to a weak starter. This is a very common issue with brand new sourdough bakers where you just built your starter, you're anxious to do your first loaf, and you kind of rush that process. You should wait 10 to 14 days at least before your starter has enough strength to really carry the rise in a loaf, but a lot of people get impatient and they rush it. So you've sufficiently built your grid through your 4 stretch and folds, and the bus pulls up with a weak starter. You're expecting 1 million yeast cells, and because it's a fairly immature or new starter, there are only 500,000 yeast cells in there. It just can't do the job. It gets halfway through the buildup of the CO2 halfway through the rise, and it just runs out of energy because you didn't have a large enough population of the yeast to actually rise the dough and fill the entire gluten matrix. Another similar variation on this, and compared to a weak starter, is where you just don't add enough starter per the recipe. This is an easy problem to solve. If the recipe calls for 200 grams, which this one does, add 200. If you say, I didn't make enough starter the night before, I didn't make enough leaven, I only have 100 grams of starter or leaven, and you try to do the recipe with 100 instead of 200, there's not enough population of the yeast to fill the grid. So again, you'll have underproofing due to a weak or insufficient starter based on quantity in that example. So here's an example of what a loaf would look like when you have a weak starter or insufficient quantity of starter. In this example, you can see the caverns inside the crumb, you can see the dense crumb at the bottom, and some separation of the crumb from the crust. These are signs of a weak starter, very common to see in loaves for people first getting into sourdough baking when your starter is just not up to sufficient strength. The third reason that you have underproofing, and this is absolutely the most common, is that you either have too low of a temperature during bulk fermentation, too short of a time during bulk fermentation, or a combination of both. So we're going to talk about all these together. So with the problem of low temperature, you've sufficiently built your grid of gluten, the yeast shows up in the appropriate quantity to do the job, but the temperature is too low, and the yeast really needs to be in that 78 to 82 degree Fahrenheit range in order to finish bulk fermentation in 4 hours per this recipe. So if your kitchen is cool and you just decide to leave it on your countertop during bulk fermentation and your temperature is 69 degrees Fahrenheit, for example, the yeast just works more slowly and it can't fill the grid in the time that you're allowing, the 4 hour time. So you'll underproof based on low temperature. Similarly, you can underproof based on too short of a time. So this recipe calls for a 4 hour bulk fermentation time. The yeast shows up ready to go. The temperature is perfect. You have 80 degree temperature. You've created a proofing chamber. You've put it in your oven with the light turned on. So your yeast is flying through the process at a perfect pace. It's ready to go, but you mistimed something and you have to cut off bulk fermentation at 3 hours instead of 4 hours. The yeast can't finish its job because you didn't give it enough time. So by having too short of a bulk fermentation time, you'll have underproofing. The good thing about all of these examples is the dough tells you if it's underproofed because it doesn't rise. So in this example, we're looking for a 30% rise in volume. And if any of those three things happened, insufficient gluten structure, weak starter or too small of a starter quantity, too short of a time or too short of a temperature, the dough just won't rise. So you can visibly see that your dough will be underproofed because it won't hit that 30% mark. So here are two examples of what underproofed dough looks like when you have too low of a temperature or too low of a time. These were two recent bakes that I had done. One was where I intentionally cut the time short to see what was the quickest time that I could finish bulk fermentation in. And you can see here, this loaf is seriously underproofed because there are large holes in the crumb. They tend to rise towards the top of the crumb, and you see the dense crumb at the bottom. This one was close, but it's definitely underproofed. Another example is where you weren't even in the ballpark with a very, very seriously underproofed loaf. You'll see these telltale signs of underproofing, which are the tunnels at the top of the loaf and the dense crumb at the bottom of the loaf. That's serious underproofing, very common for beginners, and those are the telltale signs of that. But just remember that when you're thinking about, am I underproofing, the dead giveaway is, did the dough rise? If the dough didn't rise, there's a pretty good chance that you're underproofing. So what happens with overproofing? With overproofing, there are three common things that happen. One is you add too much starter. Again, this is easy. The recipe calls for 200 grams. You should add 200 grams. Some people try to speed things up and they say, I don't have enough time, so I'm going to try to do this quicker. You add 300 grams. It definitely will speed up your bulk fermentation process, and sometimes it will run away from you. And it's very difficult to predict what the impact of adding more starter will be to a recipe that calls, for example, in this case, 3 to 4 hour bulk fermentation time. If you add 300 grams of starter instead of 2, it may be done in 2 hours. It may be done in 2.5 hours. It's very, very difficult to predict. So basically follow the recipe and don't try to overshoot the amount of starter because the bulk fermentation time can run away from you. The second thing that happens is the temperature is too warm. So in this example, we've created a proofing chamber, for example. A lot of people use their oven with the light on, and you don't happen to check the temperature. You just say, a lot of people do this, so I'm going to do it. So I take my dough after the stretch and fold, I put it in the oven with the light on, and the temperature in there in my oven will actually get up to 95 degrees just with the oven light on, no heat turned on in the oven. So the yeast is sitting here waiting to start its job at 78 to 82 degrees. It starts moving, filling up the grid, and all of a sudden the temperature goes up to 95 degrees and the yeast goes crazy. So you're looking at your timer, waiting for 4 hours for bulk fermentation to be done, and the yeast is already done at, say, 2.5 hours or 3 hours. It already filled the grid because it was working so fast at that high temperature. So what happens when the yeast kind of gets to the top, it's filled up the grid, it just keeps pumping air into the grid, and it will start bursting the gluten strands. So it's like balloons. It just keeps blowing up the balloons, and the balloons start bursting all over, and that starts to deflate the dough. The second thing that happens with high temperature is you also start to activate the lactic acid bacteria, which we didn't really talk about in underproofing because it's working in the background, it's staying out of the way of the yeast. When you start to get the temperature up above, say 90 degrees, the lactic acid bacteria loves the high temperatures, so the lactic acid bacteria will show up. It will start consuming the starches and sugars that were meant for the yeast. They start competing for the same food sources. The yeast starts slowing down or not optimizing its process. And after all the starches and sugars in the vicinity are gone, the lactic acid bacteria will eat the grid. It will actually eat the gluten and start to break down the gluten. So what happens with these high temperature overproofs is you take your dough out of the bowl, you pour it onto the countertop to do your dividing and pre-shaping, and it looks like a giant pile of ricotta cheese. It's a slushy looking mess of dough. It flattens out, it's liquefied, you can see the gluten strands in it. That's the dead giveaway of overproofing based on temperature. Similarly, the third aspect of overproofing is too much time. And again, almost the exact same thing happens. The temperature might be perfect, but instead of stopping bulk fermentation at 4 hours when the yeast fills up the grid, you let it go for 5 hours, you let it go for 6 hours. The dough keeps inflating. The yeast starts bursting the bubbles. The lactic acid bacteria starts to eat the grid, and you end up with the same issue. Your gluten structure is now broken down because the lactic acid bacteria and the yeast went past that optimal point, and they start to break down the structure of the dough. Here's what an example of an overproofed loaf looks like. You lose the structure of the loaf. The loaf starts to flatten out. The gluten starts to pull away from the crust. And here's an extreme example called the flying crust, where the gluten is so weak that the crust detaches from the crumb, and you get this giant cavern inside the crumb because the gluten has no strength. The gluten has been broken down by the lactic acid bacteria consuming it, and by the yeast overstretching it because the yeast had too much time on its hands, so it just keeps filling the dough, which ultimately bursts the bubble membranes. And the last thing that can happen in bulk fermentation that's not underproofing or overproofing, it could happen in either of those scenarios, is overhandling. Overhandling of the dough is basically where you inject yourself into the process and you do more gluten development, what you think is gluten development, than what was called for in the recipe. So in this example, the tartine recipe calls for 4 stretch and folds, and you might say, I really like the feel of the dough, I like doing the stretch and fold, I'm just going to do 8 of them, or I'm going to do 10 stretch and folds. When you start to do that, you're overworking the dough. So when the yeast shows up and gets ready to fill the grid, you've done it so much that you put another grid on top of it, and now there's double or triple the number of cells in the matrix. So instead of a light, airy crumb with these big balloons that the yeast can fill up, you've created these tiny cells of gluten. So now the yeast is just filling up all these tiny cells because there are 2 times or 3 times more of them. The other thing that happens with overhandling is that some people go beyond the stretch and fold process because they're familiar with baking bread using traditional commercial yeast, and they'll start kneading the dough, or they'll put the dough in their power mixer, countertop mixer. And what happens there, in addition to creating the dense crumb, because you're just overworking the dough with more energy, with more of that strength, you actually start to rip the gluten strands. So now you've just destroyed the grid, the perfectly set up grid that you created in stretch and fold. If you start kneading the dough, you just start ripping this to shreds. So the yeast shows up ready to do its job, and half of the balloons that it's trying to blow up have already burst. You already ripped the balloons. So you get a dense crumb. You don't get the rise in the dough when you overhandle the dough. Here's an example of what overhandled dough looks like. You can see very, very dense crumb, and that's usually caused by human intervention into the process where you just keep working the dough more than you need to. So how do you avoid issues with bulk fermentation? Number 1, follow the recipe. Add the appropriate amount of strong starter that's called for in the recipe. Number 2, monitor the time and temperature of your dough during bulk fermentation. So many people try to guess at this. You really don't need to do that. Measure the temperature, monitor the time, let the science take a lot of the variability out of the equation for you, so that then all you're looking at is the percent rise at the end, and you're not guessing about what was the temperature of my dough. Very, very easy thing to fix, and a common problem that a lot of beginners make is not measuring the temperature and the time during bulk fermentation. And lastly, don't overhandle the dough. There's always a temptation to want to be doing more handling than is required. I would say to challenge yourself the next time you bake a loaf to say, if I strictly follow the recipe, what's the minimum amount of time that I need to be touching the dough? And try that one time and see if your result is different, especially if you're having issues with overhandling. So that was a deep dive into the topic of bulk fermentation, overproofing and underproofing. If you're interested in this, I have another video in the series that I made called Overproofing or Underproofing, A Tale of 4 Loaves, where I actually go through and bake 4 different loaves and modify the bulk fermentation time across those loaves and then demonstrate the impact on the loaves. You might find that interesting as well.